maybe help somebody from getting burned, or just take some nuggets and incorporate them in your business.
Oh my goodness. Welcome everyone. Thanks so much for coming to Core 90 here with the community at eXp Realty. And I am so excited about today's session because I get to sit back and watch some of my very favorite people discuss some really, really awesome topics. Today, we're scaring you guys a little bit. We're sharing stories from beyond, things not to do, right? And this is going to be really awesome because we're going to learn from people who've been there, done that, and things where you can avoid hitting your head. In fact, I had a friend say to me early on in real estate, he said, you know, when you're first getting started in real estate, it's like running through the woods, but all the lights are out and you just keep getting hit by branches in the face all the time. And he said, and then eventually the lights just turn on and you can kind of see stuff coming and you can bob and weave and you're able to speed up. And I think we're going to learn that today. And our goal is to speed you up. And so I'm really excited for that. So before we start that, though, I'm going to do my weekly reminder to register for eXpCon in Miami, mostly because I want to hang out with you guys on the beach in Miami Beach area. This is going to be awesome. It's at the Miami Beach Convention Center. There's like 11 event hotels. You can grab an Airbnb right there. But I will tell you, do three things. One, get your registration for your event tickets. Number two, get your airplane ticket booked. And number three, get your hotel accommodations. They don't allow sleeping on the beach. So you got to take care of all three things. If you forget one of them, you're not going. That's how it works out. So we don't want you to forget, and we want you to have all of you guys there. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring up today's host, the always amazing and beautiful Lexy Sanchez, on the stage here to introduce our special guest for the day. Hey, hon, how you doing?
Hey.
I'm allowed to say hon, by the way, we're married, so.
I pay him to say really nice things about me. Well, hi, I am so excited. And I love the way you said Miami Beach like 17 million times right there. So if you're not intrigued by Miami Beach, you should come to eXpCon. But I am really excited today to host a conversation with two women agents that I not only love, but I really deeply respect. They both have taught me so much about real estate, so much about mindset, so much about positivity, and just like being an amazing human being at the same time that you're helping people and sometimes going through some tough transactions. So it really doesn't get any better in my mind than Liz Boisvert and Sara Shatto. So they both hail from the Willamette Valley. They both have been in real estate for a long time and do high volume transactions. But I will say the one common thread, no matter what these two women are doing, is they are coming from a place of positivity, a place of resourcefulness and help and love for the people that they work with. And I'm really excited, though, for them to dish a little bit on stuff that can go sideways. Because as perfect as I think they are, as amazing as I think they are, they've run into the snafus that we all do in transactions. And they're going to talk about some of that in some ways that will show us, how do you avoid those? How do you handle them when they're happening? And probably a little bit more. So without further ado, Liz and Sara, they're together, which is super fun. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.
So yeah. I asked you guys to send me a top 20 of things that you have learned the hard way. And you guys sent amazing things and kind of different. So what we're going to do is we're going to alternate. We're going to do Sara's number one thing from her list, and they're not in any particular order. They were just the way that they sent them. So Sara's, one experience, and then we'll do one from Liz, and so on and so forth. So are you guys ready to go?
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. It's real estate can be super stressful. And even when you're doing big numbers, mistakes happen. And the more you can have those conversations and share those lessons with the people around you, the better off we all are together. So,
yep, I love it. Okay, let's go, Jeff.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's see the slides.
Because this is such good stuff. I want to make sure we get through them because they are super, super helpful. And if anybody has any questions, be sure to put it in the chat, and I will make sure that I get that in there.
Yeah, this conversation is going to just be so much better if we're collaborating. So please don't hesitate to chime in and ask questions.
All right. Well, a couple years into my career, I was at an open house, a very busy open house, and this Latino family walked in and they had Coldwell Banker's flyer from the Sunday paper, and they pointed to 7 houses they wanted to see. And I'm like, yes, I will contact you later. Anyway, I did. I showed them several homes. They wanted a 5-bedroom home because they had 4, I think they had 5 girls actually. And back then, 5-bedroom homes weren't really in their price range. So I was showing them homes and they found one they liked. It was a 4-bedroom. And I looked at the parents and I said, well, your daughter's 18. She'll be leaving home soon. And they both looked at me like, well, they looked at each other and then they looked at me and they said, we don't want her to leave home. And in that moment, I realized that I had sort of prejudged, what they wanted and what their life goals were. And that was a pretty big lesson for me. So I don't do that anymore.
It's interesting because oftentimes, we think, and even within our own cultures, right? So whether that's a geographical culture, socioeconomic, whether it's an ethnic based or racial based, not all families are made the same. So I'm from a Latino family. I'm pretty sure my parents were like, dang, is she 18? Get the heck out of here, right? But
Right.
it's just funny that we only can come from our own filters and our own biases. So I think, what do you think the upshot is of that? Is like, how do you get around that? Because we make assumptions. We can't help but do that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, right? Because we can't help it. But what do you do to avoid making a mistake like that?
Oh, well, most of my lessons have been from prejudging people or what I thought they wanted or what I thought they could afford. And so the upshot with that is just letting people decide for themselves and not having a prejudgment based thinking what they need. So,
And
You know,
asking lots of questions, yeah?
yeah, lots of questions. And also, even though we do have our own filters, because we're human, that's going to happen, is just being a good listener. I think it's super important in real estate to be a good listener and not just,
yes.
and not being presumptuous or assuming. It's easy to do, so just being aware of it.
I know I talk a lot on these things, but when I'm with clients, I do mostly listening, especially when showing homes.
Yep. Are there like top questions that you ask somebody when you first, I mean, we learn, I think we learn this the hard way too, is sometimes we don't really ask or understand very clearly their qualifications financially. So like even just leaving out a question, we don't read what we get from the loan officer or whatever, and they haven't we need to make sure that that includes HOA expenses, for example. That was one thing I remember when I first started, I didn't clue into that. And I was like, oh, then an additional $200 a month for HOA, like totally disqualifies them from certain communities, right? So you have to ask your buyers, like, all the questions. What's important to you? All those things. I don't know. Are there top questions you guys ask?
I kind of wing it based on what they've asked to see. And a lot of my learning comes from just showing them different homes. And I tell them when I walk through the door, I say, please be candid in your comments. It really helps me to build the home you want in my head.
Mhm.
Love that. Perfect.
I watch their body language too.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen a buyer and I know when somebody's going to write an offer because they get this like glimmer in their eye.
Yeah.
You just
It's
know.
this is the house look like.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
start putting their furniture in like, oh, my grandma's cabinet would look so great on that wall, and you're like, this is the house. Yeah. All right, let's go to Liz's first one.
Okay. Okay. So this is a little heavy. This is fresh. It's really unfortunate when things happen. But it's a really great a refresher and a reminder to us who have been in this business for a long time to like, okay, there's certain things that you need to do and you need to stick to those that might not mindset, but you have to, like, for instance, when you recommend, Lexi's frozen, I think. Can everybody hear us? Okay, she's back. Okay. When you recommend an inspector, you should recommend 3, right? I was told that by my mentor a long time ago, but you get busy and then you get your favorites, right? And it's so important to do that. So I got to just touch on this. I had somebody that was under contract on a home in Falls City, And I called 3 different septic people to try and get us in as soon as possible because it was a competitive situation. So we had to shorten our timeline for inspections. And I did call 3, but I ended up having to go with one particular one because of their availability. I told them that they wanted to check the septic tank and they wanted to check the leach field. And then I called another person to check the lines from the house to the septic tank. And that's something that's taken me a long time to learn as well, is that you should check the lines from the house to the septic tank. I know for a fact that many agents just check the tank and they're good, but the whole system as a whole has to work together. And so if you aren't checking those 3 things, I highly, highly recommend that. So anyways, I negotiated this like a boss. I got the tank replaced. I asked him about the leach field and he said everything was fine. And negotiated another 6,000 for electric. I mean, I got her so much stuff, especially coming out of COVID, right? Like I just felt really great about what I was able to accomplish for them. The check was cut to escrow and then she called to schedule it after because the check was cut, all negotiated, and the person had died. The person that had bid it, the company died. And they said, we're sending the check back to escrow and you'll have to call someone else. And in my head, I was like, I don't even know if these numbers are going to be the same because you can call 3 people and get different numbers, right? And that's another thing is like get as many bids as you can, as many bids as time will allow. If you're spending over $1,000, you need to have more than 1 bid. So long story short, the numbers came in higher and the leach field was not good. And I'm like, what do you mean the leach field wasn't good? The person that was hired was supposed to do the leach field. He's like, nope, leach field's not good. And so immediately my client got very upset and she claims that I was hiding that information so that she would buy the house, which to me doesn't make any sense because I know that's not true. And why would I have negotiated all of that stuff and just left that one thing out to get her to buy the house? We don't want our clients to feel this way, right? No matter who they're blaming, you just don't want clients to be unhappy because our goal is to help people. That's how I run my business. That's how she runs her business. And I think that's one of the reasons we're successful. So it was pretty gnarly and lots of emails back and forth. I pulled in my principal broker and I ended up calling that company that had the death. And they said, there was only one of us licensed, but we all work together. If she can hold on a little bit, we'll be able to get the bid and honor the bid. And we'll even take care of the leach field for her because that was missed, which was great. Huge, huge. And so I gave a solution. So if you're going to have problems that arise, the best thing to do is to come to your client with a solution, and document everything, right? I went back through all my conversations. I made notes when I was talking to that septic company on who I talked to and what the date was. And so those things, if that client and this hadn't worked out and they were decided to take me to court, you have to have your defense and the notes from the transaction. When they say you should document everything, if you don't, you will regret it. And so I'm really a good note taker, but even though I'm a good note taker, there were certain things that I wish I had written down, right? And so my takeaways from it is I should have let her order the inspection. I should have given her the 3 and said, these are the top 3 that I've worked with. Whoever you pick from this list is going to be great, but I want you to decide who it is because you never know, right? But we get busy, and so it's easy just to do it for them because you want to be a server. You want to provide, but you have to remove the liability from yourself. And if I had done that and given her the power, the situation would have been a lot better. Because it would have been a decision that she made. You always want to check the septic lines from the house to the tank. You want to check the septic tank and you want to check the leach field. And so can everybody raise their hand that they've done an inspection, and I can't see everyone unfortunately, but they've done an inspection and on a septic tank and they didn't do all 3 of those. It's very likely that there's going to be a hand that comes up, right? And so the more you do things, the more you realize that what you should have done. And it's unfortunate, right? Because guess what? If you don't do one of those and then your client goes to sell the house 3 years later and that buyer does the leach field and your client realizes that you didn't advise them to check the leach field, it's going to not look that great, right?
I do have a comment about that. And one thing I've always done, except for one time, there was one inspection I didn't go to. And I know it's very common. It's actually, I think, against standard practice. but buyer's agents, you always need to be present for the whole inspection so that you make sure that everything gets inspected, especially the inspections that have been ordered. But also there's things that are happening and talked about that aren't going to be in the report. So.
And thank you for the reminder on that, because I had actually counseled with Sara during this, because she's a great soundboard when things get hairy, because she's been doing this a long time. It's good to have those friends in real estate that you can talk to. But I was busy that day and I sent another agent to the inspection. And if I had been there, I would have been very clear that the leach field was never checked, right? But I wasn't there. So I couldn't ask the proper questions. And another learning moment on that, I have a ton from this transaction, is that when I saw the bid for the repair and I didn't see anything noted about the leach field, I should have been prompted to call, right? And I'm also going to start having requesting the paid invoices, because the septic tank pumping, because you have to pump the tank and then then you inspect it, that was never paid out of escrow like it was supposed to by the other person. It wasn't my client that didn't pay it, but it was still stuff that had to be taken care of after. And you really just want to make sure that everything's tightened up and clean and done, so that you're not having to spend that time after cleaning up. So
and I hate to say it, but if you're, we have a comment here from Angela, and she's like, I always recommend, the extra inspections and whatever else. And I think a lot of us do that. Sometimes it's with, getting the sewer line, checked for roots or whatever it is. I mean, there are a million different things you can get. And when a client declines and you've been having a verbal conversation, please find a way to email them back that says, I just want to let you know that I understand you don't want to do the extra, blah, blah, blah inspection. And if you ever change your mind, here are the 3 recommended, do something in writing that acknowledges that, number one, you advised them to do it, you gave them the proper, 3 or more options, and that they declined. Because that, I hate to say it, and you don't want CYA, because what you really want is just to help them cover all the bases and get it done right the first time. And sharing stories is hugely important, which is why some people, if you think you've been through enough transactions and you don't need to hear these stories, you're wrong. Because if nothing else, you need to be armed with stories so you can tell your clients, I know it sounds like you may not need it, but let me tell you a story that happened. And when we share stories, that gives you a whole resource of stories that you can tell, not just your own. And there are so many little nitnoity things like this, Liz, that if we share with each other, we just avoid it. And you'll be out there. And I couldn't agree with you more, Sara. You should go, and especially if you're a newer agent, go to every inspection, get some wrestling knee pads, get a little headlamp, and go in the attics, go in the crawl space. My inspector thought I was bonkers, nutty, crazy. For a year, my first full year, I went on every single inspection and I followed like I was a dog attached to, like I was a guide dog. And I asked questions, but you know what? It made me a better agent, because not only do I know what questions to ask in future inspections, but when you walk into a house with the buyer or with a seller, I have a better eye now for what an inspector is going to see, what's going to need to be to happen before you even put it on the market. So it's really to everyone's benefit for you to go all the time, be there, be present, ask the questions, and make sure that they're doing it. I hate to say that too, but even the best of the best miss things.
Okay.
Prejudge clients based on their culture. You could judge sellers on the
readiness to list. Oh,
yeah. So this was my first listing. I think I was a year or so into my career. I met them at an open house. Open houses have garnered a lot of business for me, by the way. And we hit it off immediately. It was a couple that had 2 kids, and they were combining families. And so they were going to sell her tiny house and buy a bigger house. Well, being exuberant, I went right home and I wrote up the listing agreement, because back then everything was on handwritten paper. So I wanted to be ready when they said, yes, we are ready to list. And so I proceeded to follow up with them quite a bit. Like I was super excited and super exuberant. well, months go by and I'm still checking in and, hey, when you going to list? I'm all ready for you, thinking I was doing them a service, like by being ready and being persistent on hounding them. Next thing I know, they listed with someone else in my company. And I was like, hey, I followed up with them because I felt like we were friends by then. And they actually thought that I was too pushy. And, and I thank them greatly for giving me the feedback because I didn't feel like I was being pushy. But anyway, the takeaway from that is, especially people that have lived in their home for a long time or people that are combining families, it takes a long time to get to the point where they're going to list for most people.
Yeah.
And so now when I'm waiting for someone to list or even to buy, it's their time frame, not mine. So
Yeah.
I'm there for them when they're ready. I do have the paperwork ready, usually way in advance, but I'm not hounding them about it now.
Yeah, it's their journey, right? And you kind of let them guide you, and you're just the soundboard to help them get to the next step of the phase. But yeah, I can see how that could easily happen.
I did want to circle back just for a moment because when I'm showing acreage properties or before I start showing acreage properties, I'm already telling my clients that there's going to be more inspections involved with acreage properties.
Yes.
I've run across fuel tanks, always the septic systems, the well, and what I end up telling them too is if you discover problems during the inspection period, the repairs are on the seller's dime. If you discover them after we close, they're on your dime. So it behooves them. And still, if they decide not to,
Get it in writing.
get it in writing, a text message, email,
and let the professionals, you might even say to them, call this company and ask them what you should be inspecting, right? Because you're not a septic expert. Maybe there's something new that you don't know about. You can tell them what you recommend, but have them lean on the professionals. So
yeah, love it. And sometimes I always warn people too, when we start inspections, it may initiate a different kind of inspection.
Yep.
So that they know the process. Okay, let's go for Liz's number 2, inclusions.
Inclusions, read property features for inclusions that might not be listed in inclusions. So you'll have your public remarks and you've got your private remarks. It's very important to read the MLS. If you have a buyer that calls you and says, I want to see this property, and you look up the address and you go see it, print off the MLS or at least refer to it and definitely have it with your offer. I attach it in client view to every offer just so it presents itself on what property I'm writing the offer on. But I've seen before where they'll say, brand new washer and dryer, or, this high-end stove, however they write it in the inclusions or on the private, the public remarks. But then on the MLS, it'll also say what the inclusions are and what the exclusions are. And so if they're going to put it in the public remarks that this house, one of the features is this brand new stove, but they don't write it inclusions, and then you just go and copy the inclusions and put that into your offer, you probably just cost your buyer a stove. When clearly they were featuring that and they probably intended to include that, right? So I don't know if anybody has anything they'd like to add on that, because that's really all I have, but it just really understand what their intentions were. And sometimes you have to read between the lines on that. So
I think the more clear, the more you throw in there, the better. It's dumb, and it seems sometimes like repetitive and you're like, why am I writing? But the more the better. And don't cut and paste just straight out of think about it. Like, does this make sense? You're right. Because, and I always put as per MLS photos seen on, and then the date or during, MLS photos and showing as seen on date, blah, blah, blah. So that you can substantiate that you physically saw. I mean, some people go as far as like take a picture of the appliances while they're there. So they can be like, that is a totally different refrigerator. It's, people do weird stuff. So.
And then you have to also, as you're showing the home, especially as they start to get that glimmer in the eyes, start walking through each room. Maybe there's some shelving in the garage that's not attached, but it just makes sense with the space. Or maybe the TV mounts, right? The TV mounts are a fixture, but they will take them because they go with their TV. And so if your client really wants that TV mount, they like that it's mounted there, then ask that question, you know, that sometimes this is a little gray area and they might take it. How important is this TV mount to you? So just be aware of what is in the home, pay attention to what's in the public remarks, and then also pay attention to the inclusions and exclusions, because what if that porch swing on that turn of century home is why they're buying, like, they're like, I want to sit on that porch swing for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go to do the after closing and that porch swing is gone. Guess who might be ending up buying a porch swing because you feel bad for your clients or whatever, right? Like they're little things.
Well, and the other thing is, remember this on the flip side, if you're the listing agent, ask about all of those things if you're pulling all your paperwork together, and make sure that you say, you know, and I always love like stuff like that. If that has sentimental value, if that, you know, does that chandelier stay? Lots of people decorate with chandeliers now, and I'll say, does that chandelier stay? Because sometimes it's grandma's chandelier that they want to take off. I will recommend, in fact, pretty much insist, take it out before we even hit the market. Don't let people see it. We don't want it to be a point of contention in negotiations. But also, you know, make sure you include the porch swing. Maybe somebody does want it. So if they're including it, then you're like, includes the, you know, 1932 porch swing that's been redone, blah, 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 whatever. But
Right.
yeah, both sides of it, you want to make sure you're really paying careful attention to those details. We have a
And, you know,
question from Jason when you're ready.
a gray area too is that I see, this comes up probably more often than anything else, is the curtains and the rod. Somebody, you know, paid for high-end rods and they know that they'll fit in their next house and they'll take them down. And the client gets there and they're like, oh, I thought the rods were included. And they should be. If they're going to take the rods with them, it should be an exclusion. But you'll be surprised how many times that it's never even.
The rods have to stay, but the curtains do not,
Correct.
unless they're negotiated in. So remember that word that we all learned, appurtenant, means attached, affixed. It's connected. So like if somebody has like the shelves that you just buy at Home Depot, but they've bolted them in, now they go with the house.
Mm-hmm.
But again, these are the things you need to look for. You know, look for those bolts, see if it's attached. And then if it is, and your clients want those shelves, write it into your contract.
Yeah.
If you're on the listing side, say shelves in the garage stay, or take out the bolts, fill in the holes, move on.
And just because there's a shed in the backyard and it's heavy doesn't mean they can't move it.
Right. Right.
Right. Like, just don't be like, right. Ask for anything that they might be interested, because the worst they can say is no.
If it has a hot, include it, right? Go, Jason.
Well, this reminded me, I just want to share this story. Two things. We had a listing and an agent was actually the buyer on the other side. And we negotiated the whole thing. We closed the deal. And then he calls me the day he's moving in. He's like, hey, Jason, where's my refrigerator? And I said, and he was real nice, real cool. I said, hey, I go, let me look at the contract, right? Because we forget sometimes. So I look at the contract. I said, hey, nothing was written in here. And he goes, oh, well, it said negotiable inclusion, so I thought it stayed. I said, hey, man, I'm so sorry. I go check with your principal broker, because I didn't want to give him the bad news that you have to ask for it, right? So just a reminder, like, you know, just remembering that. And then on the flip side, I've had it where we've gone over the contract with a listing, and I said, here's everything. This is what stays. And they end up taking it because 30 days later, they forgot. You know, so now I remind the clients, you know, 4 or 5 days before closing, just so we're clear, this is what was negotiated in here. I want to make sure we understand. And some people say, you know what, thank you, because we were already thinking about, we were going to take that because we'd forgotten. So I just want to throw that in there. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
And if there's a trampoline in the backyard that you know your clients don't want, like, sometimes people just leave something, and it's not because they're being nice, it's because they don't want to have to deal with moving it. But if you know your clients don't want to move it, then you better make sure that you make sure the seller moves it, right? So it's not just the inclusions, but it's also the exclusions.
Yep. All right, let's go to Sarah's number 3. Wow, we got a lot of stuff to cover. This is awesome.
That's okay. Even if we don't
Yeah.
get through it, it's all good. It's about,
Okay,
yeah.
so you have prejudged buyers on their readiness to buy. Oh, poke me in the eye with spoons right now. We've all gone through this. Tell us. It's the worst.
Yeah. So, again, it was a couple with 2 kids, and they were looking to upsize. I think I met them at an open house as well. And
If you're not getting the message, do open houses, guys.
yeah, exactly. And I was again exuberant. I had been showing them homes every weekend, and I kind of planned my time around them. Well, there was one weekend they didn't ask to see homes, and I was like, "Hey, there's all these great homes that came up in your search. You want to go see them?" And they didn't get back to me for quite a while. And I reached out again. I'm like, "Hey, I can book these," and she shot me kind of a not a snarky text, but it was like very pointed. Fine, I've canceled my trip at the beach with my girls so I can go look at homes. And they bought a home with me, but I didn't get to sell their home. So I feel like they also felt I was being pushy when, as realtors, we want to get things lined up and we want to be proactive, but there's a balance. There's a fine line between doing that and honoring the client's time as well. So that was more business loss because maybe I was a little bit. I just love to show homes and love to get people going where they want to go, but it's not my time frame again.
I think
Yeah.
the most important thing to remember is just to set the expectations with your clients and say, like Sara could say, I'm a really excited agent, so I will hound you guys. If you want me to, I will be there. And if you want a little bit of space or time, just let me know and we're good. Or the other way around, if you're like, hey, listen, I don't want to pressure you guys. When you're ready, give me a call. I'm always here. But, just some way, let them know that they empower them to tell you to like, calm down, Sara, we're good.
I have quite a bit since that was 15 years ago. So I've learned a few things, but
Oh, for
I can imagine some of the newer agents out there are excited and communicating your willingness to serve. It just needs to be done in a gentle way.
It is a balance though, because, if you, especially this day and age with an IDX feed and Zillow, right? Like if you aren't on them, they'll just accidentally get picked up by somebody because they ask for information. So it's all about that conversation of what their expectations are. And, I am available, but I'm not going to bug you every day. So if you see a house that you really like, I'm your resource. Come to me and let me know and we'll make it happen. So yeah, it's a dance. It's an art.
Okay, Liz, bumpable offers. Talk to us about these.
I've been learning some lessons this year, right? But every situation is different. I tried to, on my seller and my client's request, make an offer that we received bumpable. And I wrote it into an addendum. They basically wanted the right to get out because it wasn't the offer that they really wanted. They felt like their home was worth more and they wanted it bumpable to a certain point. And I think it was the end of the inspection period. And I wrote it and they accepted it. But then when we went to bump them, they were like, no, that's not even a valid contract. Like you can't even just bump us because we were already under contract. Oh, they were contingent. We're already under contract on the replacement property. And so really you can't have even bumped us in the beginning. Like you should have never bumped us. It doesn't hold any water. And I was like, but you signed it. You were in agreement on it. And they're like, doesn't matter. My principal broker says that you didn't use the contingency to sell or whatever, whatever addendum. Like there's addendums for everything and there's a reason that are written by lawyers. And so we here at EXP have the legal hotline, at least in Oregon, that they, we can use anytime for questions. And so when I called my principal broker, they advised that I use the legal hotline, and basically the legal hotline dived into everything and they were like, yep, you should have used the addendum.
Okay, so let's spell this out. Tell people what bumpable means.
Sure.
You kind of said why you would use it, but now tell us what you need to do then. So you said you did an addendum, but there was a specific addendum. So, and this is to be very clear, because we have people in different states on the call and watching this in Oregon. So we're just talking about Oregon. And remember, with anything that we're ever talking about, ever, if you have a question, call your principal broker. If you don't know the exact correct verbiage to use on something, don't make it up. Don't get it from another agent. You could get it from another agent or make it up, but check it with your broker, because remember, we are representatives of our principal brokers or your designated broker or managing broker, whatever it's called in your state. So you need to get there like, ooh, seal of approval on everything if you are unsure. So, okay, I'm going to say that. Now tell us about bumpable.
Yeah, so since sometimes you'll see it in the MLS, you'll see active under contract. Then other times you'll see it will say active bumpable. And that basically means that they have a contract, but it's not the exact terms that they want. It's because it's contingent upon their property being under contract and being sold. And so the terms weren't met exactly the way that the seller wanted it. And so they make the property bumpable. But it turns out that in order to make another offer bumpable, that you can't make it bumpable if their home is already under contract, right? The only reason you can make their offer bumpable is if they haven't secured a buyer for their property. It's the only way. You can't make it bumpable because you want to make it bumpable.
Okay, so tell me again, but instead of saying they, because I think somewhere in there I got buyer and seller confused in the they. Does that make sense? So who's the one? A buyer, a seller is the one that's going to accept an offer from a buyer, but make it bumpable because it's not the specific terms that they want. And if they get, I'm assuming they have to have a bona fide offer that proves that they are getting the terms that they want.
You have to remove the contingency. Yeah.
And you have to specify, right? Okay. What those
there's already an addendum written that has how long they have to get their property under contract, right? And if they don't have their property under contract during that time frame, then at the end of that date, you can have the right to renegotiate or to terminate. And you don't have to put it in bumpable if they don't have their property under contract, but that addendum allows you to do so. But once they have removed that contingency, you have to take it out of bumpable status. Now, the legal hotline said that basically because it was bumpable, we could but it wasn't properly bumpable because their property was already under contract. That we could take the buyers, okay, so you've got a seller that didn't accept the terms. They didn't really like the terms, but they didn't have any offers. So they took the house goes under contract, but it goes bumpable. The buyer was already under contract on their house that they had to sell, right? That's in order to buy the seller's property. Well, because their house was already under contract, the addendum that I wrote to make them bumpable does not make it viable.
It never should have gone. It never should have been bumpable
even though the buyer and seller agreed on that, and those were terms that were acceptable to them, it didn't hold any water. So, and I'm not trying to confuse you, Mr. Bump. I'm not trying to confuse anyone, but
oh, it's good to know this though.
Yeah. And so now I'm trying to wrap my head around the whole thing and describe it in a way that makes sense to everyone. But the bumpable thing too. So basically, if you're in a bumpable situation and the seller gets another offer, you have so many days to perform. Typically it's 48 to 72 hours. And so that buyer has to be able to remove the contingency in that time frame, or you have the right to accept that bumpable offer. So addendums can be pretty vague. Be very, very clear on what your intentions are. And if you don't know for sure what bumpable means or what an escalation clause, you should
don't do it if you don't know. Call your broker.
You need to be constant. Exactly. Just call your broker.
So before we get to Joanne, who has a question, Sarah, you were going to say something about this.
Oh, well, just that a buyer can only be bumped if they can't perform on their contingency. You can't just make a buyer bumpable because the seller doesn't really like the terms.
Yeah.
If they accept an offer from someone who has a contingency and their home is already under contract, they're a legitimate buyer. They cannot be bumped unless there's a problem with one of the.
So being bumpable really just means that there's a contingency, which is what we call it in Arizona. We say it's under contract with contingencies. And it's
not here. So here, bumpable means that the buyers have a home to sell that's not yet under contract. Basically, that's the simplest way to say it. Okay. So if another buyer comes in who doesn't have a contingency, they go back to the bumpable buyers and say, we have an acceptable offer. You've got 48 hours to get your home under contract.
So it's only the under contract to sell current property contingency that makes something bumpable. That's the
There's
only.
other contingencies, like the active
Right.
under contract.
No,
There's
sure.
contingencies, but that's like their inspection period. That's their due diligence.
Okay.
Those are their
Okay,
contingencies.
yeah. No, I get it. So it's just the specific contingency of needing to get your own house sold first. I get you. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Joanne, I know she's in a room with a TV mounted on the wall, so she's trying to unmute.
Sorry, for some reason.
You're good.
I still had to say that it was okay, that it was being recorded. Okay. I just wanted to add that it's quite likely that the buyer's agent said, yeah, go ahead and sign that. Because as soon as they say you're and they want to bump you, you can say, sorry, we're pending, because we've always been pending. And so, yeah, it's, it doesn't make sense that they
It's
agree.
a tough pill to swallow for sure, having to explain that to my client. But I don't think, that there might be agents that would know that, but I don't think the agent knew that. I think that it wasn't until he sought counsel from his principal broker that, like, how do I get through this situation, that he realized that. But
Yeah. This
Well,
is
you-
why these sessions are so good.
Don't have your
Okay.
sellers accept an offer if it's not one
What
that
they
they
want.
will follow through with, regardless of bumpable situation.
yeah, you don't want your sellers to be desperate, but sometimes it happens, just depends on the market. And
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. It's just, try not to do that. Right. Nobody wants a contingency,
Right.
if you can help it, of any kind, but yeah. Okay. What do we have next, Jeff? Oh, ignore who said he'd sue if things didn't go well.
Yeah. So this was a car salesman. I bought a car from him, and he had his wife actually had some money, and he wanted to buy an investment property. This was probably 2010. And I don't know if any of you were around when HUD homes were managed by one company, and it was in Seattle. And you had 48 hours to get their contract, and it had to be red, it had to be blue ink, signed by the buyers. You had to get that signed, all their addendums, and get it to this management company within 48 hours, or your offer was dropped. Well, and they weren't helpful. They never would tell you what your mistake was. They would say, oh, you have to correct this contract. And so I went back several times to correct the contract, and because it wasn't the Oregon contract, it was their contract, HUD's contract. And he ended up not getting the home, but it wasn't until they finally dropped the contract for good that I found out that he couldn't buy the house because he wasn't putting his wife on the contract, and it was her money. So anyway, he took me to arbitration, and it wasn't anything I purposely did to lose him the house. It was this management company. They actually ended up getting fired because they were really hard to work with. The joke, Chris Aldridge actually came in and testified for me. This was just arbitration, but still it was stressful. He said the joke back then was that HUD homes aren't actually purchasable because of how hard the management company made it.
Yeah.
But my lesson is, I didn't know his brother-in-law was a lawyer, but that wouldn't have mattered. I feel like he wanted something to go wrong so that he could sue. So if someone says, if things don't go well, I'll sue, just kind of pay attention to that, because there are people that will set you up for a lawsuit, even if it's not warranted.
Yeah. Scary for sure.
take notes, take lots of notes.
All right, Liz.
When clients can't be present for signing. Oh man, that time. I've been working with them for months to find the home, and we sit around and we decide what the closing date's going to be and go through all this. And then all of a sudden they're going to be on a trip and they need to sign documents, right? Very simple thing. So just if you're discussing timelines with your client, go a little bit deeper. Make sure that they aren't going to be having a baby, or when's your due date of your baby? I had this conversation with someone yesterday. We know that we want to sell our home. The property that they're buying is new construction, and it's going to line up with her due date. And so we had that conversation of, do you have family to help you? Do we need to try and push it out? Because there's things that you can do if your client really needs to be out of town, whether it's a buyer or seller. There's mobile notaries with the escrow company. They can arrange that. It will cost your client more money, but for $200 for them to still be able to do what they need to do is probably worth it. And you can even have their spouse or who, if there's someone else that's going to be on title with them, they can do a power of attorney, and their lender can help you through all of that. So just when you're thinking of your timelines, just be conscious of the fact that real life happens, and just help them through it, because those are one of those curveballs that you'll get. And, the more you try and plan for every disaster, is not that you want to be pessimistic and have drama and stuff going on. It's good to be aware of the things that can come up. Simple.
And let escrow know the second you have something. Like I always
Yep.
send a message to escrow right away, and I'm like, hey, they're going to be out of town, or they're working that day, so we need a mobile notary, or they need
And
to sign.
and remind the title company too, because they're just as busy as we are. And so we send out an email in the beginning that says, these are the clients, FYI, one of them lives now in Florida. Right. And so they'll just skim through something in the beginning, and then you get to 2 weeks before closing and they start digging in on what they need to do. And maybe they weren't aware of it. So I will bring stuff up over and over and confirm, and then introduce the client and say, don't forget to tell them this, just so that there's not any missing pieces, because stuff just gets missed.
Yeah.
It just does.
And I will also say, just kind of sort of aligned with this, that because this happened to me, make sure when you take a listing that you've actually verified on the tax records that the people that want to sign the paperwork to sell the house are on title. That they have, because I've worked with divorced couples where you find out like 2 months, like you get past inspections and you find out that the wife was supposed to be on the documents as well, but they're in the middle of a nasty divorce and she's not going to put her name on that. And you're like, yeah. So make sure that you check the deed titles and names and all of that. Or if it's in a trust, I've had to do that. That's an easy change with an addendum, but it's really a hassle. And if you get all the way to close and then your clients go in to sign and they're like, oh, this is in the trust, it's supposed to be in our trust name. And you're like, are you kidding me? So just make sure you check those details and ask those questions, because sometimes people, they think if they're the signatory for a trust, that their name can go on it, but that's not how it works. So you just need to make sure that, their name does go on it, but it needs to be in the name of the trust. They're just a signatory. So good stuff, man. This is awesome, guys.
Oh, yeah.
What is fun?
This is a good one.
So Preja, I would want.
We all have our filters. We all have things that we like. I was showing homes to daughter of a good friend of mine, and we walked into this house that had black counters. And this was before like granite was really a big thing. The black counters, black kitchen, everything was black. And I was mortified. I was like, oh, this is so gross. I said it out loud. And no, yep, something to that effect. I might not have used the word gross, but I expressed my disdain for the kitchen. And I turned my back and I heard the actual buyer saying that she loved it. And I was like, I'm not going to be living here. So the takeaway there is that everyone likes something different. And usually if it's paint, colors like that, I don't say anything. But if it's something really big that's going to affect resale later, like there's a Walmart right behind it, or
material fact.
Well, of course, material facts, layout sometimes, but normally, again, I don't talk a whole lot when buyers are walking through a home. I let them talk and I listen. So don't assume that your buyer's not going to like really gross black walls and countertops in a kitchen, because they might.
Pink.
Avocado carpet. What's wrong with that?
My husband would probably love the red orange shag carpet, right? And he's all 70s, but somebody else, maybe not.
Yeah, totally. You never know.
Possession before and after closing. Do not let early possession unless absolutely necessary. Ooh, that's one of the things I hear principal brokers say the most. Like they don't like early possession.
Or after, or possession after. I don't like either. I'm like, nope, don't do it if you don't have to.
And it's very common for days after possession in our market, but early possession just basically means that you'll get to the closing and you know, maybe perhaps something had to shift and everybody's ready to go and everything's gone really well. And now it's another month, but the buyer needs to say, let's say the buyer needs to get out of their apartment because they've already given notice. Well, you think the easiest solution would be for the buyer to be able to move in and then everything closes when it's supposed to close. Well, the buyer gets into the house and the dishwasher breaks. I mean, early possession, it spells who's going to be responsible for what, but they don't read their contracts necessarily. And you think that you've read them and then something happens and then you really don't understand what you signed because your perspective changes, right? But things break, but also a buyer can get into the home and realize they really hate the neighbor.
Yep.
Or there's something about the house that they just really, really didn't like. Not that you want your buyer to be buying something that they realize they didn't like, but they're in a contract, right? It is not in your best interest, really anybody's best interest, and for sure not your principal broker's best interest to allow early possession to happen. And sometimes you got to do what you got to do, right? There's going to be scenarios where even though you know it's not a good idea, it's how it happens because it's not about you as an agent, really. It's about what the buyer and the seller want. But just be very, very clear with your client on what some of the circumstances you've seen or some of the ramifications of what that can be. And then go ahead.
No, I'm raising my hand so I don't forget.
Yeah, go ahead.
I had this scenario where the father had died and his wife was living in the home and the kids didn't like her. And she was physically disabled. And anyway, she would not leave the house even after closing. And the sheriffs had to remove her physically. And that was just not fun.
Yeah.
I've had scenarios where my buyer moved in early and then we had a sale fail. She had to move everything out. And so it's messy. Just don't do it.
Yep. Yeah, because I mean, you're going to have those circumstances where something changes with the buyer's qualification at the very last minute. If you haven't experienced that, you will. And so if they're already in the house, it becomes a lot more complicated to get them out. You know, and everybody's already moved. And I think the other note on that, on the title of this topic was days after possession. You know, negotiating what rents look like and pets and who can live there. And it says in the contract that the seller has to provide renter's insurance and they have to add the buyer on that policy. Most of the time you will not see this, even though they've signed it. And even if you ask the other agent about this, when you get to the end of the transaction and you go to ask for it, they ghost you and you don't see it. So it's just a lot of liability.
Breach of contract.
There was one time that my seller negotiated days of possession after, and they were negotiated to pay a certain amount that was, say, for 7 days, a daily per diem rate. And at the fourth day, they were out and they wanted some money back. But there was nothing in that occupancy agreement about what it would look like if they moved out early. So if you are going to do early days of possession after closing for your seller and a per diem rate is on the table, then I would say give it in additional provisions area to give your seller a way out if they decide they don't need it.
And the other thing is the way to kind of avoid this. I just did this with a closing. And they had like a 4-day period where they needed to be out of the house that I was selling for them, but they had about 4 days before they could get into another place. So they needed to go to an Airbnb and they had to rent extra days for the moving truck, so they could just leave their stuff in the truck. And I just said, that'll cost, about $1,500. Let's see if we can make it up in negotiations or whatever, just so they felt better emotionally about it and financially, because they were like, could we do a 1-week lease back? And I said, honestly, don't do it, because, once they've done and shown that they've done repairs that were on the repair addendum, what if something gets bumped while they're there and they have a lease? Now they're in a big fight about, well, in that week you ruined it. It's so much better. I mean, I'd rather give them the $500 to go stay somewhere else or whatever, because you know, it's just not worth it. I like a clean transactional transition. Just you bought it, you sold it, get out, get in, done.
Yeah.
Safer.
Yep.
Always go the safer route if you can.
What do we got? What do we got? It's like a surprise.
Duplex. Oh, hey, this is a good one.
Yeah,
really a
a
good one.
duplex. Confirm what side the water meter is on. Sometimes each side will have a water meter, but not always. And what side the sprinkler controls are at. Because I sold a listing, a duplex for my client, and I negotiated that her mom, who lives in the duplex, could stay. And so that meant that the person that was buying it was going to be on the other side. Well, what the agent and the buyer didn't realize is that the meter was on her side and or only on one side, and it was on her side. And I guess the meter doesn't matter what side it's on, but there was only one meter. So that's a good question if you have a buyer, is to find out when you're buying multifamily if it's separate metered. Because if it's one meter, then no matter if one person uses a ton of water and the other person doesn't, it becomes more difficult to split that up if you decide to make your tenants pay for water, right? So it's always good to have separate meters. We have a duplex and we just pay for water, so it doesn't matter. But knowing how many meters there are is a good thing. The sprinkler controls were in the mother's side. So even though they were going to live in the other side, they wouldn't have any control of that. They can't dictate when the sprinklers will come on or when they come off, or it's extra hot. So they would have to get permission from their tenant to control something about the property. So when you have multiple units, it's just really good to pay attention to those fine details.
And sometimes if there's not a meter on both sides, it could be an indicator that it's not a legal tax separated multifamily. So they've made a duplex or a triplex where it shouldn't have been. So you need to probably go to the county and do some searches to make sure that that is a properly permitted multifamily resident.
And so do you say that you as an agent should go to the county, or should you advise your clients to go to the county?
Well, both, but I mean, for me, if I'm going to take a listing, I want to make double dang sure. I'm not going to just take somebody's word for it before I get into a contractual agreement to represent somebody. So I'm going to do my homework too. And yeah, I mean, I always recommend, like, on the buy side, I want the buyer to do as much as possible, but I like to verify too, because remember, we're the experts. And there's just a lot that goes into this that they don't know. So I always like to at least verify.
Yeah.
But I just do know, because that's happened before, where it's like, why is there only one gas meter? Or why is there only one electric meter? And you're like, nope, something's wrong.
You know, as a seller too, if you're listing a duplex or multifamily for somebody, it's a selling point that it has separate meters, right? So it's
really expensive to put them in if it's not.
Yeah.
One thing Peter Rogers used to say was,
which is our old principal broker.
Send the clients to the counties or wherever they need to get the official information from the people who issue permits. Because sometimes I've noticed when I've called, I've gotten different information than what the buyers have. So it's definitely best to take yourself out of it. I mean, not totally. You want to know what they're going to be told, but you want them to get the information directly from the officials.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The less filters, the better, because your filter, something that's would be important to them, maybe it wasn't important to you, so you didn't cling on to that information quite the way they would have. So it's tricky. It really is an art to do this well.
But some people say we don't earn our keep, you guys.
Right.
All right.
Oh, yeah. This is a good one.
Took on a client who fired an agent, then wanted to make an offer on that same house. Oh.
Yes. And I actually got that client from a referral from someone in my office. And then when I found out she wanted to make an offer on the same house that she had just terminated with another client, I was like, oh dear. I went to Peter Rogers and said, hey, this is what's going on. He said, do it, we'll figure it out. And so I negotiated a contract on that same house. This is the house where the lady wouldn't leave, by the way. Yeah, it was a mess. Anyway, so same house, basically the same terms, different agent. The other agent was fired. I made sure she didn't have a buyer's agent agreement. And I was given the green light to go ahead with this transaction. Well, as it turned out, that agent took me to arbitration saying that he was the procuring agent for the sale.
And deserved.
Oh, yeah, it was fun sitting next to him in arbitration. But anyway, as it turned out, that fellow did not, he showed up for the inspection, but he didn't stay for the inspection. And the buyer was from out of town. He was fishing during the inspection. That's another, I mean, you just always got to go to your inspections. But anyway, we won arbitration because he wasn't following the best standard of care with her. But it was still not necessarily a situation I would want to get into again, especially with an agent. And I didn't, at the time, I didn't know that she had already written an offer, had a sale going when I took her on as a client.
Yeah.
So it would be a situation I wouldn't redo. I wouldn't go into that situation again.
Yeah.
So takeaway is to, if somebody says like, I just fired my agent and I want to screen it really, really well, right?
Well, I was okay with that. You could fire your agent and get a new agent, but she fired her agent and wanted that same
The
house.
same house. You think that's what caused the,
Oh, well, and if this person, this other agent has been known to take people to arbitration.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
lots of arbitration going on.
But you know, it's funny because you know, it's a fine line. I got fired by a client one time. It was on a multi-million-dollar property. And the reason that they fired me is because they realized we had an interested party, but they had like a 4-month window. And so we were just kind of waiting and going back and forth. And then when she found out that they were interested in going to write an offer, she fired me. She didn't realize that I had a 180-day clause that said for procuring cause that she would owe me that anyway. And the other agent called me and said, I want to write an offer. I see that you're not the listing agent anymore. What's going on? And I said, well, out of the blue, they told me they weren't selling. And he said, oh, they're selling for sale by owner. And as a professional courtesy, I wanted to let you know, which I thought was super stand up. So I called the client and just said, hey, I wanted to let you know that agent that had shown the house before, their client is interested. I'm really excited to represent you for this transaction. And she was like, no, I don't want you to. And I said, gosh, you know, and I kind of explained it really nicely to her. She was just kind of a really wicked old lady. But anyway, we've all experienced them. And she said, then I'll wait the 180 days. And she did. And the guy called me and he was like, I don't know what to do, Lexy. And I said, sell it and have a great transaction. I hope your clients love the place. And he was like, I feel so awful. And I was like, don't worry about it. It's not, I mean, he did the stand-up thing. I would be very careful about getting between, I would not normally like call somebody and be like, hey, I showed this property and I see you're not the listing agent. Normally I wouldn't do that. But in this case, he had called me first to say like, hey, my client's ready. And then I called my client. I was like, what the heck, So just be careful. But because the worst thing is getting into it with another agent. It's just not good. Not good.
Yeah,
When in doubt, again, talk to your dang broker, right?
and because you will very likely have to work with that agent again at some point if you're in this for yeah.
Negotiating repairs prior to close. Explain why.
Well, this kind of takes me back to that transaction that I was talking about when we began with the septic and leach field and all of that. There's time people want to buy and they want to sell and they need to do it soon. But you have this repair that's come up and the contractor that needs to do the work is out 30 days or 40 days. And nobody wants to extend the closing date to allow those repairs to happen. And this is standard. It's gonna, it's just the way it rolls, the way the cookie crumbles. But things always come up, right? If I had pushed out closing on the transaction I told you about in the beginning, then when they went to do the work, it would all the extra things like the leach field and other things that had come up would have been clear before closing, and the seller will have still been I could still go back to that seller and negotiate those repairs. So if you are going to negotiate repairs and you're going to have the repairs done after closing, which lenders do not like, by the way, you don't want to tell your lender that, then when they go to open up that can of worms, there's going to be other issues. And so I always advise my clients, if you're okay with us closing and you doing these repairs and taking the money that I've negotiated for you, there's no guarantee that there aren't going to be bigger fish to fry when you go in there. So if you're going to do that, just make sure you have that conversation. You know, if there's
So in
dry
different
rot, or
states-
if the toilet's soft, the floor around the toilet is soft, and you negotiated for them to have that fixed, and it's part of their, oh, like, we're just going to contribute towards closing costs, and that's great. Now they have extra money for that. Well, when they go to get into that floor, there's going to be more rot than you thought. It's just the way it is. So if you have to negotiate repairs and have your seller take care, your buyer pay for them or take care of them after closing, make sure that they're clear that there will be other things. Err on the side of caution.
Yeah. In some states, there's a required closing walkthrough document that your client they either have to conduct the walkthrough and sign off on the document to say that they did a final walkthrough and they approve of the premises. You have to do it for them, or they have to waive it. Or they can have an inspector, like a third party, do it. But in Arizona, for example, it's required. You cannot close a transaction without a final walkthrough addendum. So it's one of the forms that you have to do. So I always encourage people, like my listing clients, I have if you have a roofer doing the work, have them take pictures of the finished repairs and send them to you, and then you send them to me, and I send them to the other agent to substantiate that they were done. Otherwise, if you don't get it from your contractors that do the work, then you're going to need to have, you're going to have to crawl up into your attic space or up onto your roof to do it if they demand to see that. And to me, it just helps. Now you can require them to go do it, but you run the risk of them kicking a hole in something or whatever. I would rather put it there with a contractor or you that did the work, whatever you guys agreed on, and have photographic evidence uploaded into your SkySlope or whatever, so that you have proof that it was done before you ever close.
100%.
Yeah. And get the receipts. If you do hire a licensed contractor for something, have them invoice you, because you need that. So many times I've seen that backfire for people. They're like, well, he did it, but we didn't get a receipt. No bueno.
Yep. You have to show that you asked for it. You have to have that paper trail. If you go to court and they're like, well, they said they did it, judge is going to be like, that's your job to verify that, what was negotiated was completed. Yeah.
And if a contractor, if they don't have it in writing, they're going to, you run the risk that they'll just be like, I didn't do that job. They're thinking of someone else. And you're like, huh? And then you ask your client, you're like, did you pay them? Yeah, we paid him. Did you write a check? No, I gave him cash. Oh my gosh. No. No. Okay, next. Didn't stay connected enough to clients.
I actually want to do my last one, which is a situation. There was multiple offers, and one of the offers was written by a guy I really known him for years. And it was fortunately the best offer as far as terms. And so, I said, I know this guy, he'll get this closed, which I didn't really.
Show us what that point was real quick. I think it was, you went with it.
It's the last one. It's where I had a seller, I accepted an offer from a friend and it ended up in a sale fail.
Yeah, it was, let me see. Did you get it there?
Yeah,
Trusted an agent just because I knew him. Yeah,
that one. So we accepted the offer, and then I hear from escrow that earnest money was late and they're waiting for the mom to bring in the escrow money. And I was like, what? That was a little weird, but still, I didn't question it. Somebody else bringing it, someone else has checked it and seemed unusual. Well, then I heard from the lender that the mom had changed her mind about gifting the down payment and the earnest money to the buyer to buy this house. And I looked back, and this agent didn't disclose that the escrow or the earnest money and the down payment were gifted funds. And I was kind of angry because we would have accepted a different offer had we known that. And as it turned out, we had a sale fail, and my seller ended up taking less than asking because it sat on the market for a few weeks after that. The other buyers found properties they wanted. So I feel like I trusted the person. It's not that I trusted him blindly, because he didn't disclose that the gifts were, or that the funds were coming from a gift. But my takeaway is, just because you know someone and they're nice and all that doesn't mean that everything is kosher.
Yep. Yep. I will say on this, because you mentioned, other buyers had bought other properties by then. It's really important. Like even if you have an empty house and you're tempted to do like go and show, I would, or at least if you're go and show, whatever program you're using for showing, scheduling, make sure that you have a list of everybody, whether that's through your Supra or whatever, because if you do have a sale fail, you can pick up the phone and call all of those agents that showed that house and say, hey, wanted you to know we have a sale fail. Curious if your client had any interest. Love to talk to you a little bit more. It's just so good. So just keep trying. I know a lot of people like just get the business cards that people leave and throw them out, or they never go and look at their super showing list or whatever. And I'm like, you may need that. If you have a sale fail, at least make the effort. You owe that to your clients to try to call back everybody that saw it. I mean, you may have a completely new buyer, but still, it's always a good idea to know who's been showing your houses. Okay, next. You can advocate without being adversarial. You are a surgeon. I can't wait to hear this story.
Well, I don't have a story to tell about this necessarily, but there's two I learned from the people around me, and agents, principal brokers, and it's Deborah Gisserl that said that you don't have to be adversarial to be an advocate. More often than not, when you're in a transaction and you deliver, like, say, the repair addendum, the other agent immediately becomes aggressive.
Yeah.
It's an art to be able to negotiate without being emotional. And Peter Rogers, the second part of that, you're a surgeon, one of the things that he said to me that stuck was that, Liz, you're a surgeon. You go in there, you cut out the problem, you sew them back up, and then you move on. And that's been my mindset when I negotiate, that it's not about me. I don't need to get heated in order for someone to think that I know what I'm talking about, or that, I've been in this business. When someone says to me, I've been in this business 10 years. So, and I've never seen this happen, or it needs to happen this way or that way. Like, it is not about you as an agent. It's not about the other agent. It's about what the clients want. And you are a surgeon. You go in there with your professional self and you keep your cool and you cut out the problem, or you negotiate the repairs, and then you take care of it and you move on. Like, you don't let it get heated. Because, the more you do that, the more your client can feel that. And the more you're going to start putting those filters on that make it dramatic and make it stressful. And none of it has to be that way.
I always love calling another agent and saying, like, so you have a buyer who wants to buy, I have a seller who wants to sell. Neither one of us gets paid unless we figure this out. So what can we do? Let's work together, because I like to remind them in a really like positive way that, dude, you're not going to get this commission either. And we've spent all of this time. So let's figure it out in the best interest for everybody involved, because some agents don't come from the right place with doing what's right for their client, and they just get lost in that. But we do live in an interesting industry, right? We work where we are sort of against each other, but still working on the same project. So I just like to look at it like, hey, listen, we're just working, we're putting the same puzzle together. We're just sitting on different sides of the table. It all fits together. Let's just make it work. It doesn't have to be negative.
Everyone has the same goal in that scenario.
Mhm.
So
That's
work
it.
together.
Love it. Okay, Jeff, what's going back to a couple of Sarah's.
I have a story that just happened, and it's a big lesson. I think it's not on the list, but I'm an 82-year-old seller. This is the second property she's ever sold in her life. The first one she sold by herself. Get an offer. The inspector goes to pick up the radon test, and my seller said, "How did it go?" Because to that point we didn't have the repair addendum or any reports. He starts counseling my seller about how she's going to have to replace the sewer line, and she had already had it replaced. And I know, yeah, I know. This is the first time in 17 years this has ever happened. When she called me telling me that the inspectors counseled her that she's going to have to replace the sewer line again, I was livid. Like, he's not the one that should be having that conversation.
Stay in your lane.
And I'm texting the buyer's agent, and I said, "This is happening right now." And he said, "Well, did she ask him?" And I was like, that doesn't matter. He's the professional in the situation. And it ended up, we had a sale fail because
The professional, and she didn't hire him. The buyer did, right? Like, he
the
should.
inspector did his own sewer scope and told the buyers it needed to be replaced. My seller immediately had a plumber come out and say that there was nothing she needed to do. The line was fine. And the buyer's agent told me that his inspector was never wrong. And I said, "Well, is your inspector a licensed plumber?" And he said no. But because the buyer's agent was posturing as if he were working with the inspector, and the inspector's counseling my client, we had a sale fail because my seller wasn't gonna replace the sewer line just because the inspector said it needed to be done.
Mhm.
So I'm leery now of having people pick up radon tests with my client's home. It should be the buyer's agent, I guess.
Mhm.
I never had an inspector do that.
Plus, and that goes back to what I had said about how you may have your favorites as an agent, your favorite inspector, your favorite septic person. This guy that you were talking about that said, like, "Oh, my inspector is never wrong."
Yeah.
Think about how much liability he is putting on himself by saying that. Because if he says that to his client, "My inspector's never wrong," and sure as shit, he's wrong,
Yeah.
he could be,
That's a
he'll,
lawsuit.
yeah.
They wouldn't back off of it
Yeah.
either. Even though
But and I mean, it's funny though, on the listing side, there were inspectors that when I saw they were doing the inspection, I'd be like, "Oh no." But when I was representing a buyer, those were the inspectors I wanted, right? It's funny. But yeah, that is really inappropriate and scary. I always instruct my clients never to talk to if somebody's coming to pick up, I just say, let them do their thing. Don't talk to them.
I didn't know I needed to. It seems like the onus is on the professional in that situation, but now I will.
Crazy. So, okay, so we're at the end. I think we could probably talk for like 6 hours. And if we let all, 35 people or whatever on right now, 40 people, 60 people, whatever we're at, it would be bonkers, the stories that we would hear, which is what's really fun about it. But the value in this is not only to learn more about how to conduct our craft in an ethical, legal, savvy way, but also to gather the tips and to learn, like I've learned stuff today. I was like, I didn't know that. And also to have, to store up your stories because I think Angela put in here earlier, human beings learn through storytelling. The better storyteller you are, the better understanding and cooperation you're going to get, whether it's from another agent or your client or whatever. So you can disarm another agent by saying, "Hey, listen, I'm not trying to get all up in your craw right now. I got burned on a transaction last year, and I just want to make sure that all of our ducks in a row, are in a row and that we're working together. Is there something that I can do for you?" Whatever, but stories help. because it disarms people in a way, makes it easier to have the conversation. Liz.
I 100% agree. Yeah, agree with you. And this has been great. And I wish we could have more conversations like this, because this is just our stories.
And it's
And
humbling
think
too.
about how many stories are in here. Like every single transaction, I have something that I do, and I have a list, and it's called things I've learned. And so I will reflect on every transaction and take something and write it down. And so that's where I got these ideas from. And it was hard for me to pick 10.
Yeah.
There's a lot on there, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I appreciate the time to, you know, maybe help somebody from getting burned, or just take some nuggets and incorporate them in your business. I have learned so many nuggets from this lady sitting next to me. There's certain things I do in my business that have made me a way better agent, and I learned them from her. And so if I wasn't asking questions and having conversations with people that you respect around you, I just would have never, it's evolved my business in a way that it would have never evolved.
Well, thank you guys for sharing, because honestly, it's this too, though. Like, you learn what to do, but you learn what not to do from great agents. And the best agents will tell you both, right? Any agent that tells you like they know everything and they're all this and that, you're like, no, you're not. And that scares me. Do not take advice from an agent that's like, oh, my transactions are smooth. No, every transaction is different. And that's what makes it an exciting thing to do, right? This is a great profession because yeah, we're doing the same thing. They're the same components, but it's different every single time.
Yeah.
So we really appreciate you guys sharing. We'll do another session. It'll be great. Maybe we'll do like topic specific. But when in doubt, call your broker. When in doubt, open communication with your clients.
Take
When in
notes,
doubt, yeah, take notes, share a story, CYA.
trust your intuition.
Yep.
And
Okay.
lean on everyone in our community. That's what we're here for.